welcome. This is Spotlights. It's the podcast for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. And this week, I'm here with my guest, Kimberly Carfore, a professor of environmental studies at the University of San Francisco. So welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. You do a lot of work with the field of religion and ecology. You're on the advisory group for the Forum on Religion and Ecology, and you're also on the steering committee for the Religion and Ecology section at the American Academy of Religion.
Yeah.
So that's really what I want to talk about today. This is kind of, halfway through, I guess, or a little over halfway through the virtual annual meeting. So it started November 30th. It'll end December 10th. And so we're kind of in the middle here. The first week has happened. We got another week coming up, but I'd really like to hear what your experience has been for this first week. And before we get into any specific panels or anything, what have you been thinking about the virtual format? How's that been for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. From other people, I've heard a lot of different thoughts on this, but I personally really have enjoyed it for a couple of reasons. I mean, obviously, I think mostly I and other people miss seeing everybody. A lot of people say that the conferencing happens not necessarily when you give your papers, but when you're seeing people getting coffee or at night when you're hanging out and chilling out. So missing people is a little bit sad, but there are a lot of perks. Like I find that people go to more of the talks because a lot of them are being recorded. And so, the dreaded thing that happens is when there's two panels going at once that you're totally interested in, you have to choose and you go to one and you don't want to have to slide out and disturb people who are talking. So you get to go to one, and then later on, like when you're making dinner, you can listen to the other one. And so it's nice to have that option. Also, I really like, you can just kind of roll out of bed and turn on your phone while you're making your coffee, and you get to be there at the 8 a.m. panels. 8 a.m. here, it's 11 a.m. start time in Boston. And also, I've definitely noticed that the Q&A is a bit more orderly. And so having the questions filtered through the presider and also having people have to type their questions on online format makes them a bit more clear, because sometimes, you're sitting in the audience, you think you have a really great question, you have a burning question, and then when you start articulating it, it ends up not being super articulate. And so having to filter it through the computer helps a lot. And also access. I definitely noticed that voices that I don't normally hear in the conferences are able to, I don't know if it's the online format, you feel a bit more courageous to ask a question. So it seems like there's allowing a little bit more of an egalitarian tone to the conference. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it.
Nice. Yeah, that's been my experience too, largely. I kind of came in thinking it's not going to be as fun because we don't get to really see each other and do all the the commiserating and the hanging out that we normally get to do. So it's such a big part of building relationships and building building knowledge means having teams, having groups, having community, and then yet been really impressed with the quality of the panels and like you said, the Q&A a lot sharper. Yeah, fewer people who are like halfway through a question. I guess this is more of a comment than a question.
It happens all the time.
Like in this case, people are like, oh, then you're typing it out and you format it better. And there's been a couple times too where I hear somebody say something really cool. I'm like, oh, I missed that great quote they just said. I can go back and listen later on the recording. So yeah, really pros and cons.
Absolutely.
So.
And they also have the chat function, which is different than the Q&A. So the chat is kind of a more informal way. You can be like, great point, so-and-so, or if you're interested more in this research, you should read this person's book.
Right, exactly. Yeah, sharing links and stuff like that. Yeah, which otherwise in a normal conference, then you're like passing notes back and forth and
then
like
you
whispering and
yeah, and then you look like that terrible person. Yeah.
That's true. Easier to hide being a terrible person when you're online. That has its pros and
really
cons.
True.
So yeah, I'll be really curious, in the future, what will happen, right? Because even when we go back to in-person conferencing, they might still include some more virtual panels because it does provide easier access for a lot of folks.
Yeah, which I think
Um,
is a great thing because I know that for a long time, the AAR, the Religion Ecology group in particular, has been advocating for a sabbatical because, for everybody to fly together, that burns a lot of carbon. So I've been thinking about that a lot during this conference as well, that this is kind of our sabbatical trial run. And to me, it's going really well. So I'd love to see
right.
that.
Well, and that's a good segue into the main topic we have here, right? It's podcast for the Forum on Religion and Ecology. And so what does this conference have to do with ecology, climate change, the environment, nature, all these different topics? So I'm curious how you've seen ecological issues show up in the first week, like what panels you went to, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's been honestly super great because, like I said, I've been going to these conferences every year for almost 10 years. I think it's 9 years. And so over the years, I've definitely noticed a trend where this year, it's almost like any panel I go to, they're talking about ecology or climate change or the wildfires. And so it's almost like where the ideas were particular to the religion and ecology field are now spreading to where all the different I don't know how many different units there are, but they're all it's spreading, which is to me the best. Like we couldn't ask for anything better. Um, but in particular, I've gone to the first panel I went to was a panel on Joanna Macy. So if you don't know, Joanna Macy does ecological grief work. She's done a lot of activism, and so it was a panel about her latest book. And so the main takeaway I got, she was one of my teachers, and so I know her work quite well. Um, but one of the main takeaways was that she was just really thankful to be seen as a scholar, because I think for her, way back when, she taught a little bit, but then she had to make a choice where she ended up being more of an activist. And so she started doing workshops. So having people read her book at the AAR, I think she was just really honored. And so people are really waking up to how relevant her grief work is as more ecological disasters continue to happen.
Right, because she's a good example of one of the forerunners on the kind of Buddhist ecology scene.
Right,
And so, yeah, so many decades later, people are like, oh, actually, these ideas
right,
are still really worth hearing about.
right. Because
Um,
she was such a visionary at her time.
and what wasn't there also something in the animals and religion section that kind of got into like a Buddhism and animals
Right. So
thing?
the
Did you go to that?
animals, yeah, I went to the animals and religion panel, which was on Buddhism and animal ethics. And so scholars were talking about animal rights and how even framing things in the term of rights is insufficient. And so leading towards a more affirming personhood in animals and how that rubs up against Buddhist theory and, who gets to do the Dharma. That one was really interesting. There were definitely a lot of really great points being brought up. Yeah, so Buddhism and animal ethics. And then I also went to one on, I believe this was also another one in animals and religion, which is kind of like a sister unit to the religion ecology group. And so it was on race and animality. And so kind of critiquing whiteness and how environmentalism is kind of a movement of whiteness and how deep it is in the ideology. So deconstructing that um, and talking about these ideas of animality,
Yeah, that's
how
great.
they kind of fall upon racial lines, which animals represent different racial groups. Like the eagle is very much like freedom and can be co-opted towards white supremacy,
Interesting, right?
and
Yeah,
how
some
certain animals are
animals, yeah,
evil.
that's interesting. Huh. Yeah, so like what Black Panthers, you have a whole movement based on the panther,
Right. Good
whereas
one.
white
Yeah.
nationalism seems to like the bald eagle.
Right.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I still need to go back and watch that one. I hope that one was recorded.
Oh, I highly recommend it. Yeah, that
Yeah.
one was fantastic. And especially this idea of purity, right? People go out like John Muir. Of course, many of us have seen that he's been critiqued for his racism recently. And so what do we do with that information? And so the idea of wilderness is founded upon this transcendence, this purity politics, right? And so avoiding one's animality. Yeah, I don't want to get too deep into it, but I highly recommend that one.
Nice.
It's really relevant for right now.
Any other, before we get into the religion ecology section itself and the offerings it had, I'm curious, what are some of these other kind of environmentally oriented panels that you saw in some of these other sections?
Right. So I went to the one where Chris Carter was presiding. Chris Carter is one of the chairs of the Religion Ecology Unit. It was the International Society for Science and Religion. And so they were talking about Cecilia Drummond's new book. And so her new book was talking about a theological ethics through a multi-species lens. And so once again, it's interesting because I brought up how there was a Buddhist ethic and animal ethics. So this one also gets into ethics through a theological framework. And so Grace Cow was there, Norman Worspa. They were discussing her book a little bit, both affirming it and then critiquing it. So that was a pretty good one. One, I did end up going to two others. That one was a cognitive science, and then the other one was on bioethics. And the bioethics one was really interesting because they focus solely on the pandemic. But one of my takeaways was I was really inspired to see how these scholars were framing their data. And so in both of those panels, they talked about the need for a new story and the role of imagination in science and in data collection, right? And so, like I said, I've been going to the AAR for a long time. And so hearing scholars opening up to, what counts as knowledge, I thought was a really huge step and really exciting.
Right. Um, and then what else? You were you attended the panel that I presented in. I remember the mysticism unit had a couple panels actually. I think you didn't go to one of those that I did have an opportunity to go to. There was a book panel on a book called Thinking Nature and the Nature of Thinking by Wilhelmine Otten. And it was a really good panel, a lot of good panelists discussing what it means to rethink nature, not as passive and not necessarily as a victim, but nature as active and as an equal participant in God's creative power. And especially, I don't know, for the last like 20 years or something, there's been a big push for getting rid of the concept of nature and making more way for the ecology or systems theory, Gaia theory, and people like Bruno Latour, really well known for that back in like the late 90s, Slavoj Žižek, Timothy Morton, a lot of people saying we get rid of nature. It's this romantic concept. It's just about national parks and stuff, but we need to talk about ecological complexity. And her book is saying, actually, if you really look into a variety of sources from early Christian theology to people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, there are more concepts of nature available. The symbolic power of nature is something we don't necessarily want to throw out. Maybe, we might have gotten rid of the baby with the bathwater on that one.
Right.
So that was good. And then you were bringing up, John Muir's racism. That was actually a topic in my panel.
Yes, it was. Would you like to say something about that?
I won't say much. It was Russell Powell gave a very nice paper kind of addressing that. And without being, I don't know, accusatory, some people seem to get just initially like offended once you point out the racism of people in the canon, right?
Right.
So if it's Plato or Aristotle, or if it's John Muir or Ernst Haeckel, you point that and people go, no, they're still worth reading. It's like, well, we didn't say they're not worth reading. We said there's some problems there. And in fact, we need to read them to understand how these problems actually show up.
Exactly.
So yeah. And what, I don't really want to say a whole lot about my paper. My paper is mostly about a kind of eco-mysticism. I was kind of pushing back on the nature stuff and saying maybe we do need an ecological mysticism, not just a nature mysticism. And I think people like Aldo Leopold are kind of good examples of that. Like we need ecological science, and we need to realize that whatever we thought was nature is not doing so well right now.
Right.
And it's very denaturalized. If it was ever naturalizable, it's definitely been denaturalized now. So there's a kind of different process we need to engage with that. And And contemplative practices can help us do that.
Right, right. So
And
yeah, because you were saying critiquing nature, mysticism, uh, going back to the Joanna Macy point, to tap into nature isn't just to tap into the beauty of nature, because the natural world is not doing so well. So, what do we do with that?
yeah, it's if nature is this kind of ordered and beautiful whole, it turns out that we're really damaging it in a pretty severe way, right? Mass extinction.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there was another great paper by Timothy Grieve Carlson on the Big Thicket, which is a really complex, biodiverse ecosystem in Southeast Texas. And people have mystical experiences there. And not just mystical, but
Right,
like supernatural, like seeing lights and things like that, or
right.
seeing panthers. And people are like, there are no panthers in Texas. People are like, well, I saw one. So, yeah, pretty interesting. I always like hearing people kind of valorize what we normally dismiss as being supernatural or paranormal or
Yeah.
something.
Oh yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so yeah, that was a lot of fun. And that's another good example of what you're saying earlier. The mysticism unit, not normally associated with doing ecological stuff. Here they had a couple panels that were kind of themed that
Exactly.
way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you see it infiltrated.
So, we could probably talk about a lot of other panels for a while, but
Yes, we could.
the star of the show, clearly the Religion and Ecology group. So I'm
Yes.
curious, what was the Religion and Ecology section doing this week?
Great. So the first panel was on highlighted 3 case studies, right? So one was coal in Pennsylvania, the other was pilgrimage to the Jordan River, and then the other one was an agricultural movement in South Africa. And so back to this ethics component, they were talking about ethics and on the ground, like where the rubber meets the road, right? Because in religion and ecology, we have all these ideas and theories, how to change ideologies, what our ethics should look like, should it be a bioethics, whatnot. But then when the rubber meets the road, right? So you've got this case study in Pennsylvania where they say no, coal, these coal workers, right? They say, coal is a gift from God. I believe that. That is my religion. And so, what do you say to these people when you're doing ethnographic work? You can't tell them, oh, I'm right because I'm a scholar. And so, this particular scholar was talking about the nuances and complexities involved in working with these people, right? You can't tell someone their God isn't right or something. So I just thought that was a really brilliant way to demonstrate how some of our ideas, when you put into practice, may not necessarily um, work. And so what do you do with that, right? It's a problem. And so the second panel was highlighting, it was looking back to move forward, right? And so we're looking at the legacies of Rosemary Radford Ruther, Dennis Edwards, and Sally McVeigh. And so it was basically, highlighting these are some religion ecology scholars and what do we do with their work in the future. And I thought one of the best, most brilliant papers was from Tim Middleton. And he used the concept of the body of God, Sally McVeigh's body of God, to talk about earth trauma and how, how fracking is actually a traumatized response from the earth. He didn't use Gaia theory, but he was applying, this idea of trauma. It's not just a human or interpersonal psychological experience. It's also an experience that the earth is going through. And then the third panel was on Muslim environmentalisms, which highlighted Anne Gade's new book on Muslim environmentalism. And it was wonderful because that is kind of a marginalized perspective, has been in the past in the religion ecology group. So yeah, I was honored to preside on the first two and then attend the third. So yeah, it's really exciting stuff.
Nice. Yeah, I appreciate all of that. The case studies, and then revisiting some of our kind of pioneering figures in the field.
Right.
And then, yeah, that book, Muslim Environmentalisms by Anna Gade, I've heard a lot of people referring to that. I guess that came out at the end of last year. It's a 2019 book, but it
Right.
seems pretty influential. I think that might be kind of the new standard
The
go-to
go-to.
text. Because, yeah,
Yeah,
like you're
that's what
saying,
I
it's
was
been
getting.
relatively marginal ever since whatever Lynn White, 1967, talks about
Yeah.
Christianity as the roots of the ecological crisis. Christianity became such the focus, so much eco-theology, so much
Yes.
discussion of Christianity and the environment, and a lot of the other religions don't quite get as much airtime.
Yes.
And that's definitely been the case with Islam. So yeah, I really appreciate that panel,
Yeah, absolutely. Me too.
and agree. Yeah, Tim Middleton's piece was great. I enjoyed that a lot. I like anybody who's working with Earth systems, sciences, and theology,
Yeah.
right? Because it's
Well,
one thing to think about the environment, but you got to think about the whole planet.
yeah, exactly. And then James Tashant, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. It sounds very French. So he talked about, and this is kind of like why it's beautiful to have Anne Gade's new book, because we keep applying these Christian concepts to explain religion ecology as it arises, through a Christocentric perspective. And so it's helpful to begin opening up to other religions as well. But James mentioned this idea of the logos in all animals, and the Trinity exists in all animals. So moving back to that idea of how to conceptualize personhood in animals and animal rights, which then complements the Buddhist and animal ethics panel. So yeah, there's a lot of different threads that we're crossing. I was really excited to see that.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good conference experience when you kind of get a sense of like, okay, there's a lot of diversity of topics, and you get some common reference points. You see, we're all kind of grappling with some similar problems together. So yeah, it's a good opportunity to learn and to just feel supported by our community of peers and colleagues, and get to meet some new people, despite the fact that
Yeah,
we all can't hover over the coffee table together as the coffee shows up.
yeah, I
So
know.
yeah, missing to have that kind of personal contact with people, but there's still a little.
Yeah, it is fun. I find that if I had a question, I've been in email contact, or if I've been excited about an idea, I'll email someone and say, "Can you say more about this?" And so, in a sense, it can build a long-term connection because now you have that email connection, right? Whereas if you're
Yeah.
talking with someone, you may not have made that exchange or exchanged cards. So yeah, I think it's been really exciting.
Yeah, no, that's true. I agree. You don't necessarily have to hang out in the hall afterward. There is follow-up emails. And so we just have to use our imagination a little bit and like, oh, right, I can send you an email.
Exactly.
Well, great. And so we have, a few more days left. Is there anything you're looking forward to in this last week or?
Well, just in general, I mean, I've been so excited about the panel so far, and there's been so many takeaways. I'm just excited that it's a whole another week next week.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, the business meeting is on Monday. And so we'll be discussing who or what ideas, what theories we're going to have for the call for papers next year.
Right.
Yeah, so just kind of excited in general.
Yeah, and I think this will be airing Monday. That's when we release these videos, and so some people probably won't see it till Tuesday or Wednesday. And so at that
Right.
point, it's too late to tell them to watch the business meeting. And the business meeting is part of a whole panel on religion, ecology, and colonialism and
Right.
coloniality, which is another
Right.
really important topic that really hasn't gotten enough attention in previous years. So I'm looking forward
Absolutely.
to that. And I guess if somebody's listening to this and they're registered, go back and watch the video
Watch the
if you missed it.
recording.
Yeah,
And if you have an idea, feel free to email me or Chris Carter for ideas for the call for paper for next year.
excellent. Well, great. I really appreciate you being on here, Kim, giving us a little
Yeah,
rundown of what's happened so far and sharing some of your enthusiasm for it.
yeah, super
It's really a
excited to be
treat.
here. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I'll have to have you back on another time where we can really get into your specific work. You've done a good job kind of being a reporter, but obviously you have, your own writing, your own teaching, and stuff like that. So we'll definitely do that another time.
Yeah,
But
I'd
for
love to.
now, thanks for being on here. Thanks for telling us a little bit about the AAR. We'll be back next week with a kind of after party. I don't know, a post game show. I don't know, some kind of rundown of what else happened this week and what to look forward to in the new year for the field of religion ecology and that kind of stuff.
Super.
So thanks for being here. I'll let everybody go. Probably rambling too long at this point. I don't know, lost track of time. So
Exciting stuff.
it's too exciting, and I lost myself in the fun. So thanks so much. And for everybody tuning in, thanks for being here. And we'll see you again next week with some more stuff for you. So in the meantime, take care and be well.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.